From Toronto, Canada, The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio, AM 740.
And welcome to the Audio Imaginarium. Come on in, weary traveler. Hang your cloak on a peg, grab a stool, and come gather around the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. Former U.S. Secret Service agent Gary BYRNE is standing by. He's got a brand new book out titled Secrets of the Secret Service, The History and Uncertain Future of the U.S. Secret Service. We are live on YouTube tonight. You can go to my YouTube channel, Strange Planet. Please be sure to hit the red sub button while you're there. Faz Kazi is behind the big audio board tonight. Ryan is producing the live stream from his underground lair. My story producer, Albert Vinzel, is en route to Göbekli Tepe on special assignment. Just kidding. Hey, congratulations to Stuart Fiennes of Galway, Ireland. Stuart is one of our Patreon supporters, and he's this month's winner of some Strange Planet merch. And I don't know if I'm holding that up. I hope you can see that. I've dropped a CD of my Strange Planet radio feature in the post for Stuart, and that should be arriving in a couple of weeks. If you'd like to become an official supporter, go to patreon.com/Strange Planet and choose the donor tier that's right for you. This past Friday, we had our first exclusive hangout on air for our Star Chamber tier, and it was great meeting Kirk down in Scottsdale, Arizona, one of our newest Tier 1 donors. It was on this date, January 27th, 1967, the tragedy struck. All three astronauts aboard the Apollo 1 capsule, Gus Grissom, Roger Chaffee, and Ed White, died in a horrific fire during a pre-launch test. That was 52 years ago this very day. On the day that he was shot and killed by John Wilkes Booth, Abraham Lincoln approved the formation of the United States Secret Service, a government agency tasked with protecting the integrity of the nation's currency. In 1901, after the assassination of President William McKinley, Congress extended their duties to involve the protection of the president. And as the name implies, the organization is extremely guarded when it comes to discussing details of their methods, but we're not completely in the dark, in part thanks to my guest, Gary BYRNE. Served in federal law enforcement for nearly 30 years in the U.S. Air Force Security Police, the Uniformed Division of the Secret Service, and most recently as a Federal Air Marshal. While serving as a Secret Service officer, Gary protected President Bill Clinton and the first family in the White House. His first book, Crisis of Character, was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. His latest is Secrets of the Secret Service, The History and Uncertain Future of the U.S. Secret Service. Gary BYRNE, welcome aboard. Good to have you back on the program. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much for having me back.
Let me begin with a very simple question. How does one become a member of the U.S. Secret Service? Because, for example, I just completed a very simple criminal background check just to get a security pass that will let me into a radio station here in Toronto where I host Coast to Coast several times a month. I can't imagine the criminal background check you'd have to undergo. I mean, do they go back in time and interview your kindergarten teacher? I mean, walk us through that a little bit if you could.
Actually. Yeah, they actually the Secret Service has some special rules that they get, believe it or not, or I should say, go figure. Let's say, for instance, if they were like when I applied to be in the Secret Service Uniform Division, if I had a criminal record, they have the ability to open, a criminal record as a juvenile. They have the authorization to go into any juvenile criminal record to see what somebody may have done. The background check for me took 2.5 years because I had been stationed overseas in the Air Force. The average background check at that time was probably 18 months. It took 2.5 years for me. They go into everything. They look into your finances. You have to pass a polygraph test. They ask you about what they would consider any sexual deviant behavior. They ask you about basically they want to know if you have a normal relationship with farm animals, or it's they get pretty deep into it. But it took a long time, but I finally got through it. So.
And now I would imagine for anyone contemplating a career in the Secret Service, if you've been active on social media, they're going to go back and check that. I mean, that's going to come back and haunt you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is completely different from when I joined. It's just amazing. When I started in 1991, it's just amazing how communications have changed between now and then. I mean, I wouldn't be any more surprised to find out that, we were walking to the moon almost. You know what I mean? Just the way you can communicate now, and everything you've done, just like, if in high school, when they were doing my background check in the early 90s, if they had come across somebody I went to school with in high school and they said, well, Gary was there one night when we stole a car. Well, now, people do everything they do, they put it on social media, and people are famous. We've some of us have probably done it ourselves where you say things on social media that you don't particularly mean or you wouldn't actually do, but then they're there forever.
Exactly. Yeah, young people need to understand that, not just for a job in the Secret Service. Eventually, it's probably going to come back and haunt you. Now, you were assigned to protect the Clinton White House.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that there are thousands of Secret Service agents, I guess, at any one time, not just the ones that are running alongside the presidential limo.
Right.
Now, were you considered to be part of the Presidential Protection Division?
Well, not initially. I was in the Uniform Division. Now they are. The Uniform Division is actually considered part of Presidential Protection. But when I was there, we were just the Uniform Division. The Uniform Division of the Secret Service does the metal detectors. They do all the fixed posts at the White House. They do the perimeter post outside. They do the emergency response teams. They have a crime scene investigation team in Washington. They also do the counter sniper, the bomb sniffing dogs, and we were just considered the Uniform Division. Now, over the years since I left, they have pulled the Uniform Division in a little bit more closer to presidential protection, just for communication reasons, for management reasons. And I talk about it in the book, in my second book, Secrets of the Secret Service. Some of the things they've done are good, and some of the things they do in their management system is, it's a very old management system, and it's kind of hard for them. But yeah, the Uniform Division is now considered part of presidential protection.
And while you were protecting the Clinton White House, tell me about a typical day if there was such a thing.
Yeah, so for me, let's say if it was a day shift, I would probably leave my house at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd get to the White House. It'd take about an hour. I'd usually work out first. And most of us, a lot of us did do that. One day you lift weights, the next day you do running, and then I'd go to roll call about 6:30. And when my post, when I was President Clinton, my post was outside the Oval Office. So I would head over there. I had a partner. We rotated an hour on or an hour off, standing outside the Oval Office. Sometimes he would take it first, or I would take it after I worked out. And then you basically, first thing you did when you went in there is you walked through the whole suite of the offices that the president uses, which is the Oval Office, his secretary's office, the cabinet room, his study, the dining room, his little bathroom. And you walk through there and you make sure that nothing is out of place. Nothing's leaking. There's no fires. Everything is normal. And then you basically just wait for you have a copy of the president's schedule, and you just wait for him to come over, and you do your job. You're basically on standby if there's an attack, and you make sure that everybody in the hallway is supposed to be there, that you recognize everybody, and you help the agents identify everybody too, because the agents, they come and go as the president moves, but the Uniform Division guys are always there 24/7 at those posts. So you work with you work together. When we have our issues, the Secret Service agents and the Uniform Division guys always had issues from time to time, but we always worked together and got the job done. So, but that would be a typical day. Like you get there, you get a lunch break, and then depending on what the president did or how busy the day was, you just kind of went along with it. Some days it was smooth, and some days it was crazy hectic, you know.
Lately, I've been watching an old series on Netflix, Designated Survivor. I mean, how accurate a portrayal of the Secret Service is that? I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a character there, Mike, African-American gentleman, who's sort of portrayed as the main Secret Service agent protecting the president and his family. How accurate is that?
Well, they're taking a lot of license with it a little bit. You know, the Secret Service, like there's at any one time, there's at least 6 agents around him. Now, when he's in the Oval, the agents are posted outside of the colonnade, outside in the hallway where my post was. You know, they're kind of surrounding him, you know, outside the room. You know, normally day to day, they don't go inside the room with him. From time to time, they do. I mean, there's always exceptions. I mean, I've actually myself, you know, under some of these exceptions, have actually opened the door and walked in and stood in the president with the president and the agent because of something that was going on. But the way they portray it in movies, it's a little bit more serious. I'll be honest with you, a lot of the way they portray the Secret Service in the TV and movies, they portray them as more serious than what we are. And I don't mean we don't take the job serious, but it's like anywhere. If you had that much tension on you all the time, like they portray in TV and movies, you would melt. You know, you would be exhausted at the end of the day. You wouldn't last until the next day.
Right.
So it's a little bit more laid back than they portray it, but it's a serious job, and you learn how to, you know, deal with that stress in certain ways. And but the way they portray, you know, it's always so dramatic, and it's not always dramatic. It's usually, you know, you hope for a real boring day, and the days that are like that, that's great, and some days it's not. You know?
Well, in terms of training to be a Secret Service agent, would you be required, let's say, to watch the Zapruder film, for example?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we do. It is one of the films you watch, and it's really funny. I'm glad you brought this up. I didn't really realize this till last year, 2 years ago or a year ago when I was writing the second book, Secrets of the Secret Service. You know, they teach you about the Kennedy assassination and the Zapruder film in a certain way. You know, they do it in a way where they want to make sure that, like, they don't have any fingerprints on it. The Secret Service tries to teach it like they don't really have any responsibility for what happened. And that's really not what the reality is. But they do talk about the Zapruder film. And there's another piece of film that they show, and there's some still pictures. And then they do read some. They had a small bit. I remember them reading to us, like, some of the reports from guys, like, you know, personal notes and stuff that they made afterwards, and things that happened to some of the guys. But they don't spend a whole lot of time on it. And you know, in hindsight, like I said, when I was writing the book, it made me a little suspicious, you know. And I tried to, when I wrote Secrets of the Secret Service, my co-writer and I, Grant Schmidt, we tried to leave the conspiracy theory stuff out. We just wanted to, you know, work on the facts that we knew. This is what they did. This is what happened. This is what somebody should have did. You know, it was neglected. But they do teach it, and they actually teach the Reagan assassination pretty deeply too. But when I joined, some of the guys that were around when President Reagan, John Hinckley tried to assassinate him, they were still on the job. So we got to meet these guys. So that was fascinating too.
Yes, and we'll get into some of the specific assassination attempts a little bit later. Gary Byrne with us for the full 2 hours, and we are discussing his new book, Secrets of the Secret Service, The History and Uncertain Future of the U.S. Secret Service. Now, in Crisis of Character, to be brutal, you lambasted the Clintons. When a former Secret Service agent tells tales out of school, so to speak, are there repercussions? So, for example, is there like a fraternity of former Secret Service agents, and do you risk being ostracized when you write a tell-all?
Absolutely. You do, absolutely, and just about everything you said came true. Yeah, the Retired Agents Association came out, and, you know, first they tried to say that I didn't have access to what I saw, And then when that didn't stand up, because the truth is, you can go on YouTube and actually, there's a YouTube video of me actually working my post during the Clinton administration. George Stephanopoulos is in the video. President Clinton comes into the video. It's a documentary that it just happened to be filmed, but the Clinton administration allowed to be filmed while they were there. So, it proves that I was there and everything, and everything, the history of what happened, me being subpoenaed and forced to testify, proves that everything I said was true. But yeah, they came out and tried to slander me, and I started a court proceeding on them. And so when the second book came out, they were pretty much silent. But the truth is that at least 40 other, I read and researched 40 other books, roughly, written by other Secret Service employees, usually agents. And I'm the first uniform division officer that ever wrote a book like this, or these two books like this. So they didn't really know how to handle it. But the truth of the matter is, my feelings aren't hurt. I get, they're trying to protect the image of the Secret Service, and that's one of the things I talk about in Secrets of the Secret Service. In some ways, they're more worried about protecting the reputation of the Secret Service than they seem to be in protecting the protectee. So, but yeah, you're right. They did come out and they're not happy about it. But by the same token, there's not much they can do about it. So,
prior to you coming out and talking about this, and other Secret Service agents that have written, not tell-alls, but they've sort of revealed certain things about the Secret Service and so forth. Prior to that, was there, and is there still, this unwritten rule that Secret Service agents take their secrets to the grave?
Yeah, there is, to a certain extent. Here's the other thing I've kind of discovered, and I kind of use this as a part of my defense when I wrote the first book. All those, there's been a lot of books written by other people that were never in the Secret Service. And I will tell you that their information is right on. It's right on target. So somebody in the Secret Service was talking, and it wasn't somebody from the uniform division, because you can tell by the way that the story folds out when you're reading it or you're hearing somebody talk about it. What the perspective was, you can tell it was from an agent's perspective. So, through the history of the Secret Service, agents have always met with people in secret. Somebody's writing a book. Well, I can't tell you officially, but, over a free steak and some drinks, I'll tell you unofficially. And so what I've done was, instead of doing that, I put my face on the book, my name on the book, and I came out and told what the truth is. And, that was hard to handle for some people. But it is what it is. If you're going to do the right thing, do the right thing.
I neglected to ask you when I mentioned the Zapruder film, and you said that you had studied it, and it is part of the training. I know you don't delve into sort of the conspiracy aspect in your new book, Secrets of the Secret Service, but what do you think after looking at that umpteen times? Was the fatal headshot from behind, or was the shooter in front or to the side of the president?
Yeah, so I kind of come down on a couple sides of that, to be honest with you. And I will tell you that, and I say this kind of, I have fired every firearm just about that there is, small arm that you could, that is used in law enforcement. And I've rifles, shotguns, handguns, you name it. And I've shot about everything you can think of. I will tell you, when I watched that film, that bullet that impacts him, that opens up his skull, if I had to guess, I would tell you it looks like it's going faster. It does look like it's a different rifle round. I believe it looked like it impacts him from the front, but I don't have anything to back that up. There are a couple conspiracy theories that I kind of touch on a little bit, and there's one that particularly I purposely left out of the book. I'll talk about it, on the radio shows and stuff, but I kind of left it out of the book because I don't want to make it too confusing. But the bottom line is what I discovered was that President Kennedy was basically killed because the Secret Service was incredibly incompetent that day. There was a lot of procedures they weren't using. The ones they were using, they weren't doing correctly. And they basically left the window open that a guy could stick a rifle out and take a shot. And the night before, some of those guys were out partying, and we found evidence in documentation and in other people's books that they were out to 3 to 5 o'clock in the morning. And then after learning that and studying some more stuff, and then you watch the Zapruder film and you see most everybody kind of shocked or in a stupor, it fits right in, with the exception of the gentleman that you see that runs from the follow-up car to the back of President Kennedy's car.
Right.
And Clint Hill. And there's one other person you don't see on the film that I found through my...
Gary, I have to interject here. Excuse me. We're going to take a break. That's all right. We'll take a quick break, come back, and we'll pick up on that. Gary BYRNE, former Secret Service agent, revealing the secrets of the Secret Service right here on The Conspiracy Show. Stay with us.
When in doubt, blame the government. You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. Let's get cozy.
For winter, get cozy at Pollock's.
Pollock's Carpet Market.
Hey friends, don't know if you heard the news, but the good people at YouTube arbitrarily decided to demonetize my YouTube channel, Strange Planet. Now, they claim that we are re-uploading content that doesn't belong to us, which is entirely false. I own The Conspiracy Show. Of course, I own Conspiracy Unlimited, and I own The Rock and Roll Twilight Zone. And all of those and this radio show can be found on the YouTube channel. Now, we are reapplying for reinstatement in about 30 days. I'm not sure if we'll prevail. Something tells me we won't. It seems as if YouTube is targeting programs like mine. However, I need now your support more than ever. We've taken a big financial hit by losing the monetization on YouTube. So now I need your help more than ever. I hope you'll consider becoming an official supporter of The Conspiracy Show, the YouTube channel, and my podcast, Conspiracy Unlimited. Here's what you need to do. Go to patreon.com/Strange Planet. Patreon.com/Strange Planet. And consider donating $50 a month, $20 a month, $10 a month, or whatever you feel comfortable giving. Thank you so much. I've never needed you more.
You to be simply the best. And if you're interested in turning over a new leaf, who better to inspire than pop music's original warrior queen, Tina Turner. Also, get down with next-level research into your gut, your brain, your happiness. And for 2019, we've got 19 fresh destinations that you're going to want to know about. Zoomer Magazine's Inspired Winter Issue. On newsstands now.
The owners of the system are asleep. Now we can play. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Hey, welcome back. Great to be spending a Sunday night into Monday morning with you. Gary BYRNE is with us, the author of Secrets of the Secret Service, and he was, he was in the Secret Service during the Clinton White House years, standing right outside the Oval Office. Before we get back to the JFK story, do you remember the first time you set foot in the Oval Office? What that felt like?
Yes, I do. I'd only been there about 6 months. It was so early 1991, and I had signed up to train to work outside the Oval Office, and so I went over there one day for an hour to stand with the guy that was there. And the president at the time was President George Herbert Walker Bush, and so he was not in the Oval Office. So we went in, and he walked me through the whole suite, and it was. I hate to sound corny, but it was kind of magic. I mean, it was just unbelievable. You know, I'm a kid from Ridley Park, Pennsylvania, you know, right outside of Philadelphia. And, I mean, how the heck did I get there? It was, you know, that feeling kind of never went away, to be honest with you. Not completely, I promise you. It was kind of magic. I greatly appreciated the opportunity.
All right. We were talking about how, based on your research, the JFK security Secret Service detail had dropped the ball. They were out partying the night before, well into the wee hours. And you mentioned, with the exception of one Secret Service agent, and you wanted to talk about him and one other.
Yeah, the first guy you see in this Bruder film, Clint Hill, he runs from the follow-up car to President Kennedy's car. He was actually Mrs. Kennedy's lead agent. What you don't see in the film is 2 cars back is Vice President Johnson's car, and his lead agent. His name slipped my mind, but it'll come to me in a minute. His lead agent. As soon as he hears the first shot, this guy leaps up in the seat of the car, turns around. It's an open car, but it has a bar across between the 2 seat sections. He leaps over the bar and pushes the vice president down on the floor and his wife and lays on top of him. I mean, those are the 2 guys that did the right thing. And when you watch that 3 to 5 seconds go by on the tape, they're all kind of stunned. They're looking around. They're not really sure where the shots came from. The guy driving the car slows the car down at one point almost to a stop again. And he actually, you see on the film, he hits the brakes twice. And he's not sure what to do because he's not the normal driver. He wasn't trained properly. The agent sitting next to him doesn't give him any commands for 3 to 4 seconds. So, it wasn't just incompetence and imparting. It was bad training at the time. It was ego. With the Secret Service, even today, and I'm guilty of this myself. You get in there and you start kind of believing your own press, and the truth is you have to train, you have to practice, and you really have to play the what if game. What if this happens? I do this. What if that happens? And do do that? Do I need to do this? And these guys just, they were making mistakes. The advance was poorly done, and they got caught that day. And again, set aside the conspiracy theories. They left the window open big enough for somebody to stick a rifle out of. They set up a motorcade route that brought them right into an area of perfect ambush, and the driver slowed down for them. So, and it's not, it's just incompetence and bad training is what it boils down to.
True or false? Secret Service agents take an oath to take a bullet for the president. Is that true or false?
No, it's not actually an oath. So this came up when I wrote the first book. Everybody was, you took an oath. The oath that you take is to the Constitution of the United States and to the office of the presidency. Now, I will tell you that in your training, many times, there's 2 things, and this kind of goes back to one of the questions we were talking about earlier, was the 2 things they keep kind of pounding into you is we're hiring you to stand up and take a bullet, whether you're in the uniform division or an agent. Your job isn't to turn around. If the president's attacked, your job may be to turn around and pull your gun out and fight, but more than likely it's for the agents right around the president is to grab the president and move him. And move is the order of the day. Don't stop moving until you have into a hardened facility. And the other thing that I pound into you is, you keep what happens to yourself. That you shouldn't talk about these things. And I know it sounds a little ridiculous for me to be saying this now, but I will tell you this. I absolutely believed it 100%. I still believe it to a certain extent, which I know sounds a little crazy because I wrote these books. But my situation, and I am rationalizing this a little bit. I get it, but my situation was a little bit different. Because of President Clinton's behavior, I got subpoenaed 6 times. It kind of derailed my life. I wanted the truth out, and to get the truth out from my perspective and my coworkers' perspective, this is the only way to do it. So, but yeah, they do pound that into you. And they have the scenarios, for instance, you saw in the Reagan video, where the guy literally stands up on his toes and sticks his arms out, and they are trained that way. Exactly.
After you discovered some of Bill Clinton's character flaws, let's put it that way, did you still feel the calling that you would, if necessary, take a bullet for that president?
Yeah, it didn't change a thing. And just to reiterate that, people have asked me before on radio shows, and it's probably one of your next 10 questions, but I'll jump ahead if you don't mind. It is like, what if I was still there and Mrs. Clinton had gotten elected? I would protect her with 100% of my abilities. Absolutely. That's the job. You have to disconnect. You have to have that ability to disconnect from your emotions, your politics. And you have to realize, you know, half the country, regardless of who's president, half the country wants them in there and the other half doesn't. And half the world hates them. And you stood in front of, you know, everything you believe and your classmates and put your hand on a, you know, raised your hand and swore an oath. And, you know, if you didn't understand it was a risk to your life, then that's your mistake. But you do your job, you do it to the best of your ability, and you hope for the best. Absolutely. I'm a firm believer in it and always will be.
It reminds me of it was an old joke about someone going over to a friend's house. This is how old I am. It's a Nixon joke, but it was they walk into this person's den and they see a portrait of President Nixon, and he says to this guy's a Democrat, and he says to his friend, "I didn't know you were a fan of Richard Nixon." He says, "I'm not. I'm a fan of the president." So it's the office. It's all about the office and respect for the office.
It's true, and I will tell you, it's overwhelming. It's you know, nothing he ever did that I saw, and I saw, you know, there's a lot of stuff I don't talk about. Again, I wasn't trying to take down everybody that ever worked for him, and bring up any more crap that isn't out. But the job is to protect them. That's what you do. You protect them. You protect them. You protect them, and you do it to the best of your ability. You don't want to be that guy. You know, I always said I didn't want to be that guy sitting in front of a Senate subcommittee trying to explain, you know, why the president splattered all over Pennsylvania Avenue, or, you know, God forbid somebody in the stand because I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. So, you definitely have to have that mentality, in my opinion and my experience.
Let's talk a little bit about the history. We'll be coming up on a break, and we'll start the conversation now and then discuss it further later. But Lincoln, as I mentioned earlier, irony of irony, signed the Secret Service into existence on the very day of his assassination. Now, mind you, back then it was all about the protecting the currency. It was an extension of the Treasury Department. But what kind of security did Lincoln have at the Ford Theater, and would John Wilkes Booth have been able to get that close if Lincoln had Secret Service protection? So what Lincoln had that night was he had two people, a police officer and a military officer. The police officer was across the street in the bar. Yeah. And there's just so many jokes there. And then the military officer was distracted. What you have to understand about Lincoln's assassination was John Wilkes Booth, you know, and don't get me wrong, I'm not cheering on Booth, but you have to, you know, lay the facts out, and so you can learn from him. John Wilkes Booth set it up very well. He had a couple days before, he had walked through the theater. He was an actor, so he'd been there before. He planned it out very well. He actually manipulated the lock on the door and drilled an extra hole in the door so he could see in there to make sure the president was in there. I mean, he set this up very well, and he got the other people distracted. If the two people that were supposed to be there had been there, it might have been a little bit different. If Lincoln had 5 people protecting him, it probably would have been a lot different. The modern day Secret Service can protect the president from a Lincoln type assassination, but later on in your show, I'll be able to tell you a story, you know, where they kind of almost made the same mistake with President Obama. I'll we'll wait till later when you bring that one up. But you know, it all comes down to, you know, how good you are that day and how fatigued they are. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book, is that Secret Service just works all their employees into the ground almost. So, but yeah, it is preventable. But you know, everybody's got to be on their game. And in the case of Lincoln, you know, I hate to sound like I'm on Booth's side, but he did his planning, and you know, under the circumstances and the time that it was, he was a little high tech about it. You know, when you think about it. So fascinating to read, but you know, and Lincoln, I don't know if you saw this in the book, but
but Lincoln actually almost got himself killed when he went out to the battlefield during the Civil War. He, you know, he used to wear that tall hat.
Yes.
He's out on the battlefield during a battle, and a bullet goes through the top of the hat. And, everybody around him thought somebody took a shot at him. Lincoln was just convinced that it was an accident. Like, you know, nobody actually shot at him. So, but anyway.
All right, Gary, we'll take another quick time out. We'll come back. We'll talk about Garfield, McKinley. We'll talk about some other attempts. Teddy Roosevelt, of course, Reagan, much more. Gary BYRNE, the author of Secrets of the Secret Service, the history and uncertain future of the U.S. Secret Service. Back with more in a moment. Stay with us.
From Yeti to Nessie, pyramids to pandemics, all is revealed on The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
It's time to get track-inspired performance with road-ready offers from Acura. Right now, receive up to a $4,000 cash rebate on select 2019 Acura MDX models, equipped to take on winter roads with standard super handling all-wheel drive and Acura Watch driver safety and assistive technologies. Lease now for 1.9% for 36 months, or get up to a $4,000 cash rebate on other select MDX models. Visit your local Acura dealer or AcuraGTA.ca for details. Acura, precision, crafted performance.
If travel were a novel, this trip would be on the bestsellers list. Join DH Tour in May for 8 nights as fact and fiction blend together. From the Battle of Hastings to the Queen's Windsor Retreat, or from Lord Crawley's Downton Dwelling to the Dickens Festival in Rochester, Kent. Soak up the atmosphere in Portsmouth, Brighton, Dover, and Canterbury in historic southern England. DH Tour's Tour of the Year. Visit dhgrouptours.com and view page 16 of our brochure.
The fate of Narnia is at stake. The Shaw Festival presents The Horse and His Boy, an exciting theatrical adventure, perfect for the whole family. This magical C.S. Lewis story features 4 runaways, a boy, a girl, and their enchanted horses, who are called upon to save Narnia. The Horse and His Boy. Tickets are on sale now. Go to shawfest.com.
Happy Chinese New Year and happy 40th anniversary to Mandarin. To celebrate, our dumpling festival is back. Try all kinds of sweet, savory, and spicy dumplings like hagao, siu mai, Szechuan sweet chili dumplings, plus even more special features on our award-winning buffet while supplies last. But hurry, Chinese New Year in Mandarin is only on till March 3rd.
A celebration of taste, Mandarin.
Visit mandarinrestaurant.com.
The truth is not out there. It's right here. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Gary BYRNE stays with us for the full 2 hours, former Secret Service agent and the author of Secrets of the Secret Service, the history and uncertain future of the U.S. Secret Service. We were talking about Lincoln. I wanted to talk about Garfield. He was a guy that was 16 years later, after Lincoln's assassination, was shot in Washington, D.C. at a train station at point-blank range from behind. Again, no significant security detail. Hard to imagine the President of the United States. I mean, what happened there?
Yeah, so one of the things, I'm glad you said it like that because it triggered something I wanted to talk about. Was one of the things through our history is that presidents, and the Congress is guilty of this too, guilty of many things, but this is one thing that I found, is they didn't want presidents to look like kings. And kings get protection, and, you know, with these huge armies around them, and they didn't want them to look like kings. And a lot of the presidents have quite often, you know, fought security, you know, didn't want it around them, didn't like the way it made them look. Teddy Roosevelt was famous for some of his writings about, you know, when he first became president, you know, he didn't like the Secret Service being around him, and and McKinley was the same way, and they didn't like that. It bruised their egos, you know. It made them look like they weren't tough, and that's was one of their fears. And a lot of times their staff didn't like the intrusion and that type of stuff. So it kind of comes down to like the old story about, you know, how many people have to get killed at an intersection before you put up a stop sign, you know. And then I guess, you know, that the injuries started stacking up, and then finally, you know, they started getting serious about protection, and you know, to a certain extent. So,
well, you mentioned McKinley and how he didn't like security, and he loved glad handing, and he was shot, of course, in Buffalo, New York, at the Pan American Exposition in the music pavilion, and his own secretary told him on 2 separate occasions, something's going to happen here, don't go. And McKinley basically told him, no, we're going to do this. How much ability does the president have to say, no, I'm wading into that crowd, or, you know, I'm going to get out of the limo? And how much authority does the Secret Service have over the president in that regard to overrule him?
Right. It depends on the timeline you're talking about. Now, what you were just discussing, McKinley at the expo, basically he had to say, so to speak, like his protectees that day, those guys were on the ball, and actually at one point one of the police officers went out. There was a military honor guard. He brought the military honor guard in, and without the president's permission, had them basically post around him in a big circle, like a picket fence. And it was working very well. And then as he greeted so many people started moving around and getting frustrated, and the lines kind of broke. And then this guy got in, and he got close enough to look like he was pulling out a handkerchief, and he pulled out a pistol. And so nowadays it's different. There are rules and laws, and when presidents get elected nowadays, and I had quite a bit of insight into this when I was protecting President Clinton, because I had a very good relationship with a lot of the senior agents, and they brief these modern day presidents. I mean, the briefing they give them to get their attention is, it's scary, you know, because they lay it out. I mean, but yeah, the modern day Secret Service agent has the ability to override the president. But here's what we learned. And I got to tell you, I learned a lot more from my research about this particular thing than I did in my time there. But when you use that card, when that agent uses that card, and under some circumstances, he pretty much realizes that he's going to be replaced in the next 6 months or sooner. Like if he uses that card and the president doesn't like the way he used it, and I can give you a good example later on where an agent does use it and it saves the president's life, that I discovered. And but if you use it and you piss them off, and they will replace you.
You get reassigned. You don't get fired.
It depends. At that point, like if you're a senior agent, you're probably close to retirement already, and so yes, in the case that you're not ready for retirement, yes, they will just reassign you. But most cases, guys have the retirement time. They've been on long enough to retire, and they will retire. But yeah, in some cases they'll just transfer them. But it's not. It doesn't happen that often, and it's easy to explain. Most even if the time that you do it, the president's upset about it or his staff, when later on when there's an after action discussion, and you explain to them what's going on, because there's 1,000 things in this guy's head right now. I mean, this agent is making split-second decisions, one right after the other. Who's that person? Who's this person? Do I have enough uniform division guys? Are the metal detectors working right? You know what I mean? Like, you name it, it is happening in his head. And if he errs on the side of protection, then and you want to throw him to the wolves, then that's on you. But like I said, I've had my issues with the management in the Secret Service, but it's not usually about the way they're doing the job. It's about the way they manage their employees. And these guys are, like I said, they're making decisions, 100 seconds. and it's all about protecting this woman guy's life.
And can the president order Secret Service to protect other people? For example, a cabinet secretary or a family member of the vice president.
Yeah, and they actually have. During President Clinton's time, it's probably the quickest story to tell you was.
I got to get, sorry, pardon the interruption. We're going to get you to tell that story on the other side. This is a short segment. We'll come back, Gary. Will tell us more about inside the Clinton White House as a Secret Service agent. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show. Don't go away.
You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Well, what do you think?
That's it?
What do you mean?
It should be bigger.
But I paid so much money.
It's a really small unit. Size matters. Get bigger square footage, a smaller mortgage, and a huge package of new incentives at the Bear Creek Ridge condo event in Barrie, Saturday, February 16th. A 3-bedroom in the GTA costs between $1 and $2 million. Our 3-bedroom around $500,000 and $1,000 down on signing.
It pays to leave the GTA. Plan your exit strategy today at bearcreekridge.ca.
Winter's here, and even though the holidays may have come
And gone.
you still have your next holiday. What you say?
You don't have your next adventure planned.
Open up your calendar. Pull over first if necessary.
Go ahead. We'll wait.
And once you've set the date and picked the place, we'll be here waiting for you.
At Swimco.
With expertly fit swimwear and accessories to help you get the most out of your next adventure.
Commence your countdown.
To feeling good half naked with help from Swimco.
In Lime Ridge Mall, Square One, and online at swimco.com.
Did the holidays leave your carpet and upholstery in need of a cleaning? I'm Jessica Kasparian, president of Turco Persian Rug Company. If you have area rugs, wall-to-wall carpet, or furniture to clean, we offer over a century of experience. Free area rug pickup and delivery, or bring it into us and save 20% off the cleaning.
Located at 452 Richmond Street East, where there's always free customer parking. Visit TurcoPersian.com. Turco Persian Rug Company. Unbeatable since 1906.
My business isn't small. It's more small-gantic or small-normous.
With the new BMO Rewards Business MasterCard, you'll earn rewards points on all the purchases your
Small-gantuan.
business makes. Plus, get 35,000 welcome points and pay no annual fee for your first year. To apply or see the new small business credit cards, visit bmo.com/yourbiz.
It's small-mendous.
When a bank sees your business's potential, not just its size, that's the BMO effect. BMO, we're here to help. Terms and conditions apply.
Where there's smoke, there's The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Welcome back. Gary BYRNE, former Secret Service agent, is with us for the full 2 hours, and his latest book is Secrets of the Secret Service, The History and Uncertain Future of the U.S. Secret Service, and we will talk about the uncertain future in hour 2. Right now, we're sort of delving into a little bit of the history of the Secret Service. We talked about Lincoln, the irony that Lincoln signed the Secret Service into existence on the very day he was assassinated. And the Secret Service was not really extended to presidential protection until after McKinley's assassination in 1901. We're going to talk about some of the close calls, but we were talking about Clinton. And I had asked you, Gary, whether a president has the ability to order the Secret Service to protect other people, like cabinet secretaries or extended family members, etc. You were telling me about Clinton.
Yeah, well, before I finish that story, let me tell you this real quick. When I joined the Secret Service in 91, they had 12 protection detail. 12. When I left in 2003, they had 28.
Wow.
So, yeah, that gives you an idea. And I don't really know what they have now. So back to answering your question was, yeah, so President Clinton's president, and they do a terrorism attack on anti-terrorism attack on what they think are terrorist training camps in Africa somewhere, and so after the attacks and stuff, they use cruise missiles and stuff. So of course the terrorists are going to do a counterattack, and And through a chain of events from two different avenues of information, the Secret Service finds out that there's a viable planning going on to attack one of President Clinton's cabinet members in Washington. So they brought the information to the Secret Service. The Secret Service brought it to the president. I mean, immediately, like the director walked it right over. And the director, and this is something else that might be fascinating to your listeners, like no matter what's going on, the director of the Secret Service is one of those people that just can walk right into the office. And he'll only do that when it's necessary. All he has to do is walk into the president's secretary's office, smile at her, say hello, and like she won't even, they'll just say, "Oh, okay, no problem, sir. You know, you need a minute with them," and then interrupt whatever he's doing. And he went right in there and told the president of the threat, told him that they were ready to move and protect these people immediately, that they were already putting the motorcades together, the cars, the human beings, they were ready to do it. All you had to do was say, you know, pardon the pun, but pull the trigger. And they did. And they protected this guy for a year and a half.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it can be done very quickly and on the fly almost, so to speak.
And all former presidents, all ex-presidents, do they all, by law, require Secret Service protection, or can they sort of opt out and hire their own private security detail?
Yes, to both those questions. It's afforded to them by the law, but it's also they can opt out. You actually have to sign a document relieving the Secret Service of the burden. And President Nixon did that. President Nixon was so ashamed of the way he left office that he paid for his own security. Now, his security that he hired were former Secret Service agents, but you know, it was a private security company that an agent had started, and he paid for it himself. All modern day presidents are being protected by the Secret Service. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book is I think it's time to change that a little bit. I propose that they protect them for a year and then let these guys, give them a stipend from, you know, to pay for their private security, and then let them hire whoever they want to do their security, because, you know, it's taking away so much of the Secret Service resources.
Exactly. We'll get into that as well in hour two. It seems since 9/11, really, the Secret Service has been called upon to do so many other things that were not necessarily intended originally, but we will get into that. I want to talk about, you know, sort of close calls and attempts that we never hear about. Attempts on Obama. You mentioned that there was kind of a close call that almost mirrored the McKinley assassination.
Yeah, a little bit. So 2014, President Obama is down in Atlanta, Georgia at the CDC, Center for Disease Control. And he's there for a good portion of the day. And he's going to different parts of the hospital, meeting different people. Well, the Secret Service, this is one of those examples. They're just so overworked. And the agent doing the advance, you know, was working 20-hour days before he even did that advance. He was exhausted. Anyway, some mistakes were made. And basically what happened is through a volley of mistakes, they let President Obama 3 times in one day get on an elevator. And the guy operating the elevator would work for a private security company. The Secret Service had never interviewed him, didn't even know the company was working there. The guy had not been interviewed. He wasn't given a pin, and he was armed. And he not only was he armed, but he had a criminal record. He had some run-ins with the law, with violence, with a handgun. And 3 times he got on the elevator with President Obama, and nobody even questioned who he was. And at the end of the day, the 3rd time as he was leaving, the only way they figured out there was something wrong is the guy pulled out his cell phone and started taking pictures of President Obama. And then he started asking questions. And when they realized he was armed, then they do what they, you know, unfortunately, they do what they kind of do best, and they do right away when they get caught making a mistake, is they try to cover it up. And they tried to hide it, but the story got out, and a couple agents that were very upset of what had happened, you know, got the story out. But you know, I mean, if that guy had balance in his heart, he could have took a shot at President Obama, and I don't know how he could have done it and not killed him. I mean, from that, from
Right.
that distance, standing right next to him. So, that's an example of their management style. They're using a couple, let's say just for the sake of our conversation, they're using, 300 agents or 500 agents on PPD. They need 800. They have 1,000 uniform division officers. They need 1,500. And they use the smaller number and they work them in overtime until they're exhausted. So
When someone threatens the president, let's say on social media in a tweet, is it automatic that you're going to get on a plane? Somebody in the Secret Service is going to get on a plane and knock on that person's door, whether you're in Washington and the tweet is tracked to San Luis Obispo, California. You're on the plane and you're knocking on that person's door. Is it matter of fact like that?
Well, sort of, not quite there. But it depends on the threat, and of course, social media is tough. I mean, in theory, you could threaten the president from a cave in Alaska, but in the scenario that instead of somebody jumping on the plane, the Secret Service just sends an email or picks up a phone and calls that closest field office, to where they trace that person, and then they do the investigation and interview from there. But pretty much the way you said it, and they try to track down every threat, but and they do, but it takes time, and there's lots of them, and I mean, when I was there before social media and the internet was like it is today. I mean, I left in 2003. It was pretty much the way it is today. But I mean, you have to admit to yourself that like every year that goes by, we can just transmit stuff so much faster, and so and there's so many platforms electronic platforms you can threaten the president from. It's hard for them to run it down. They really are kind of meeting their match with it, but they do work on it very, very diligently, and they do try to run down every threat or lead.
And I mean, you have the power to investigate that individual. If you, for example, it's not just an automatic, well, you've threatened the president, you're going to jail. If you investigate and you discover that this person has an alcohol problem or mental illness, do you have the power then to basically not exonerate, but to shield that person from serious prosecution?
Well, you can go either way with it. You have the power to actually, if you feel that there's a viable threat. For instance, somebody makes a threat, you trace it down to somebody in California, you get there, and it's a 70-year-old man in a wheelchair who's angry at the president because he cut his Social Security. There's no weapons in the house. The guy is not going anywhere. You don't have to hammer him. You interview him, and then if he said, during the interview, the guy says, "I am so embarrassed. I had a couple beers that day. I was angry. I'm in a wheelchair. I feel like I'm at the end of my rope. I'm embarrassed I did it. I'm sorry. I would never, I don't like the guy, but I would never do that to him. I couldn't do it, and I would never want to do that." Yes, the Secret Service has that judgment call.
Well, there's some humanity there. That's nice to know. Listen, we'll take a time out, Gary. Sorry, Gary, got to run. We'll pick this up on the next hour. Gary BYRNE stays with us. Hour 2, former Secret Service agent and a remarkable tell-all. Well, he doesn't tell everything, but he tells an awful lot about the U.S. Secret Service. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Syrett. Stay with us.
This is Zoomer Radio, CFZM FM and CFZM AM, owned and operated by MZ Media Incorporated.
Live from Toronto, Canada, Earth. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett on Zoomer Radio.
Hey, thanks for inviting me into your home, long-haul truck, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' well-appointed rec room with the shag carpeting, the ping-pong table, and the wood-burning stove, your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. And hello to everyone listening in on our flagship station, Zoomer Radio here in Toronto, 740 kilohertz on the amplitude modulation band and 96.7 on the frequency modulation band. Hiya to all of those checking us out on one of our affiliates across North America. How do to those listening via the Zoomer Radio and Conspiracy Show apps. Those of you watching the live stream on our YouTube channel, Strange Planet, those of you in the live stream chat room, however and wherever you're listening, I bid thee the warmest of welcomes, and I thank you for your fine company. Former U.S. Secret Service agent Gary BYRNE is here. His new book is titled Secrets of the Secret Service, The History and Uncertain Future of the U.S. Secret Service. Before we get Gary back in here, just a reminder, we are streaming live on YouTube tonight. Go to my YouTube channel, Strange Planet, and don't forget to hit that red sub button. Next week on the program, author-researcher John Potash will be here for the full 2 hours. Several years ago, John wrote a very controversial book called Drugs as Weapons Against Us, and that has now been turned into a documentary film. He'll be here to tell us all about it. That's next week on The Conspiracy Show. Gary BYRNE is a former Secret Service agent who helped protect the Clinton White House in the 1990s. He is the author of Crisis of Character and his latest, Secrets of the Secret Service, the history and uncertain future of the U.S. Secret Service. Before the top of the hour, let me remind listeners, we're going to open the phone lines as well. If you'd like to weigh in with a question or comment about the history of the Secret Service or what's happening now, where did it go wrong? We've had a number of instances, of course, where the Secret Service has been disgraced. You may recall that Bitcoin heist involving a Secret Service member. Then back in 2012, we had the Secret Service, I believe it was in Colombia. They were there protecting the president, and there was kind of an all-night drunken party involving prostitutes and so forth. There have been a number of security breaches at the White House. We'll get into that as well. If you'd like to weigh in with a question or comment, phone lines now open at 416-360-0740. That's in the Greater Toronto area, 416-360-0740. 0740, toll free from just about anywhere, 1-866-740-4740, 1-866-740-4740. Gary, we were talking, let's see, where did we leave off now before the break? We were talking about, I've lost that trail. Sorry.
We were talking about, I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, not to worry. That's all right. Let's talk about some recent security breaches at the White House. What's happening? How does something like that happen? How does for example, a recent incident at the Trump White House. Walk us through. What do you think is going wrong here?
Well, again, it comes down to the Secret Service's management style. They're trying to do, if they need 1,000 people, they're trying to do it with 700, and they're exhausting these guys. And I can't overstate that enough. I hate to sound like but that's where you have to start. You have to start with your manpower. And just to give you a quick example, the average uniformed division officer at the White House makes, depending on how long he's been on the job, let's say he makes between $70,000 and $90,000 a year. Some of those guys in 2017 made $235,000 a year. They made more than the Secretary of Homeland Security because they're working so much overtime. But to get back to what causes the fatigue, they get distracted, they're tired, and they're stretched manpower-wise, and where they might need 25 agents to hold down and officers to hold down a perimeter or 50, they're using, they're using 35 instead of using 50 because they're stretched. People make mistakes. And the truth of the matter is that they also have a very young workforce. Their turnover rate is incredible in the last 10 years. So those are all factors that people need to look at.
There was a pair of Secret Service agents that were assigned to protect Trump, and they've opened up about the sort of the anxieties of their job. And there were a pair of credible assassination threats that they stopped in Manila. How often are there attempts that we don't hear about?
Quite often, actually. Can you want to talk about the attempt on President Clinton when he was in office in Manila? Do you know about that one?
No, I don't. I mentioned the one about Trump, but no, tell me about Clinton's assassination attempt.
Yeah, let's start with this one because it also kind of loops in when we were talking about earlier about an agent overriding the president or vice versa. This happened there too. So they're in Manila, and President Clinton, he has a public schedule, but then while he was in Manila, there was he was doing a private meeting with a leader from another country, and it was off the record. And so when they're leaving the one event that they're at to go to the next event, they're gonna stop in between for this kind of clandestine meeting. And it's done very often. There's nothing sinister about it. It's just that somebody wants some advice, and So anyway, at the last minute, the agent in charge of the president's detail, who was actually in charge of PPD at the time, his name is Lou Marletti. This is all public knowledge. Lou was a good guy, and he's in charge of the president's detail. And he tells the president at the last minute, we're changing the route. It's going to take us 15 more minutes to get there, and we're going to be a little bit late to your meeting in between, but we have to change the route. And President Clinton was upset about it, and he really went off on Lou. And but Lou stuck to his guns. And the information he got came from the U.S. Army was helping the Secret Service with doing some surveillance, and the U.S. Army said that they believed they had a viable threat on a bridge, and that there could be possible explosives on a bridge. So they took the secondary route, and the president made his meeting and everything. When they went to the bridge and they did an investigation, they found a bomb with more than 25 pounds of explosives. It would have completely destroyed the entire motorcade. It was a real threat, and Lou Marletti saved President Clinton's life, absolutely. And that's one of those times where he overrode the president's wishes, and because he believed in it. Lou Marletti had been, in the Army during Vietnam. He had actually been in the Special Forces medic. Like he believed, he was emotionally connected to the Army and believed these guys, and it saved the president's life. And he took a beating over it at the time, but as soon as the story got out, of course, he kind of became a hero. So.
And do we know how many attempts have been foiled during the Trump presidency?
There's two that I know of, but to be honest with you, I'm not sure that they're public. But if you know of an attempt, tell me about it. I'm sure I know most of them. But there's two I know. I'm not sure if they're public or not.
Well, there was the one also in the Philippines during the Asian 50 summit. That was in November 2017.
Right. Similar situation. And they actually a very similar situation. And it was detected and it was thwarted. There was another one that we talked about in the book, in Secrets of the Secret Service, that right after President George Herbert Walker Bush left office, he was over in the Middle East, and they stepped over, stumbled onto an attempt that was actually Saddam Hussein was trying to kill him and Mrs. Bush. And it was a viable threat, but they detected it and they stopped it. And it gets really complicated when you're in another country, because then they're responsible for responding to it. And sometimes some of these other countries, they respond you may respond with a bulldozer when they could have responded with a shovel, or even vice versa. So it's very sort of Secret Service. Not an easy job. Especially if those guys that are making those decisions, that are on the ground with the protectees. Because the life. I mean, they're protecting the president, but they're involved in it too. If, for instance, if Lou Marletti had relented and buckled to President Clinton's pressure and stayed on that route, they probably all would have been killed. I mean, 25 pounds of explosives on a bridge is enormous. So, anyway.
Right. The groundwork, let's say a president is coming and he's going to be staying in a hotel. Let's say in Toronto. They're coming to Toronto for a G20 or a G7, and they're going to stay let's say they're staying at the Fairmont York Hotel. How much in advance does the Secret Service come to vet hotel employees, to scour the hotel, et cetera, et cetera? How much? Walk me through how much groundwork is involved here in advance.
So the minimum is about 3 weeks, preferably a month or more. They could do a lot of the research that they need to do. Somebody can do it really from Washington D.C. from a laptop. You get a list of the names of the employees, you start running them. Of course, you go to Canadian law enforcement intelligence. They're going to give you all the help that they can, and they're actually working together. When that Secret Service agent gets into Canada, he's immediately met with a counterpart from Canadian law enforcement and/or intelligence, or both, and probably somebody from Canadian military, and they all work together. The agent will say this. In most cases, they know what they need. I mean, in some cases, these guys work together so often. And actually, your example of Canada is the perfect one. They go there so often that these guys are probably friends already. They know each other, and they're passing each other the information before the guy even lands on the ground. And then you have to get bodies. You have to get law enforcement bodies from the Canadian police department, and you have to get cooperation from the hotel. And of course, everybody's more than willing to cooperate with you. And it's many long hours, a lot of meetings, and then you give everybody kind of their marching orders to a certain degree, and everybody carries it out. And if they run into roadblocks, then they contact the Secret Service back, or in this case, like the Canadian supervisor for the military law enforcement, and they get what they need. And because nobody wants everything to go off without a hitch, and then they want the Secret Service to get the hell out as fast as they can.
Right. I mean, for a hotel, that must be just hell for a hotel to have to contend with that, because you're commandeering elevators. Do you vet every single employee of the hotel?
Yeah, they do. And just to give you an example, I've been involved in it this way. I've been on duty, in events like this. I've been in hotels, and the route to move the president goes through the kitchen. And more than once, I've been the UD officer, because I worked outside the Oval Office. All the senior agents knew me very well. So more than once, I've been asked to go into the kitchen and stand there right on the route where the president's going to pass by. And, about 5 minutes before he gets there, I walk into the kitchen, and there'd be an agent at each end, and I'd be in the middle. And, just before they would move in, like if there was a chef standing next to a table with a bunch of knives butchering meat, I'd say, listen, when I tell you, put the meat cleaver down and just step away for a minute. And they're like, oh, okay, and they do, everybody just kind of stops and pauses for a second, lets the protectee walk through. More than likely, the protectee is going to say hi and thank you and smile at them, and then keep on going. And then once he gets to the other side of the room or out of the room, they go back to butchering their meat and cooking and doing whatever they're doing.
I don't know, Gary. I would think ever since June of '68 in the Ambassador Hotel, taking the president through the kitchen, bad idea.
Yeah, well, you got a valid point. The problem wasn't the route they took; they just didn't have it secured. But that's a good example of what I'm talking about. Their ideal of taking them to the kitchen was great to avoid the crowd. The problem was it wasn't secure. They didn't have real protection. I mean, I love Rosie Greer, but he was a good football player and probably a very good minister. But they just didn't have enough security. They weren't doing real security, so.
Well, in '68, presidential candidates weren't afforded Secret Service protection. Are they today?
Yes. Yes, they are. And it's kind of, again, we improve things by disasters, and so after RFK gets killed, they pass a law. They start doing protection for the word they use is viable candidate. So who's to decide who's a viable candidate? So this election coming up in 2020 is going to be a very, very tough election for the Secret Service, because at some point there could be as many as 15 viable candidates on the Democratic side. So you can imagine Secret Service will be stretched way beyond their limits. I mean, they'll be borrowing agents from the DEA, from the ATF, from the U.S. Marshal Service to man all these protectees. It gets very cumbersome, but that's the terminology they use. And the way who decides it's a viable candidate, it's the Secret Service a little bit, and then there's a group of about 6. There's like 3 people from senior government agencies, like senior people from government agencies, and then 3 people in the Washington, D.C. area that they're not necessarily government employees, and they kind of sift through the information and they suggest to the Secret Service and the president, look, these guys are really viable candidates. And in some cases, the president can say, well, you're not providing a protection to this certain person, but I know from the Secret Service that this is a viable threat against them, so we're going to protect them too. And the Secret Service never says no. And that's good and that's bad.
Right. That therein lies the problem, right? They don't say no. We'll come back to that. Let me grab a call here. Melanie has been waiting patiently and she's checking in from Toronto. Good evening. Good morning, Melanie. Welcome to the Conspiracy Show.
Thank you, and a Happy New Year to everybody. I was wondering, what do you think of the scenario? You're protecting the President of the United States, but you're also in the same room with another foreign, let's say, President or Prime Minister, leader of a country, and he has his detail to protect him, and they're armed. How do you know that one of those men or women would not be a threat to your president, because all these other people are also armed, protecting, suppose, let's say Putin or Xi Jinping? How do you determine whether do you vet their people out also and they vet your people out? How is that done? And also the second question, very quickly, what do you feel should be done in North America with the bad press policing has gotten? You knowing the system, how would you correct that if you were in charge?
Excellent questions, Melanie. Let's tackle that first one first. How the foreign leaders' security detail? How do you know to trust them?
Great question. I'll tell you what. I'm gonna throw a bone to a friend of mine. I hope your listeners still listening. Write this name down. Dan Emmett. His name is Dan Emmett. He's a former Secret Service agent that wrote a book, and he tells you a terrifying story in his book about that exact thing. And basically what you do is, let's say the country is Israel, not an issue. We work together with them all the time. Let's say the country is one of the African countries that we're at odds with, and the security, we have questions about their security. The Secret Service, basically what they do is they double up with the agents. And the presidents we protect, because I've seen this happen with Clinton, where, he'll be in the Oval Office and all of a sudden he'll look up and 2 or 3 agents will walk in because they have some concerns about something in the office. And they'll double up and they will, protect them. And if they think it's necessary, they will ask the security from the other country to back up a little bit and give the protectees a little bit of room. I've been in the room when it's happened. I've been outside the Oval Office when similar things are happened. But this guy I used to work with, Dan Emmett, wrote a great story about that. It happened to him. So great question. And what was the second follow-up question?
It had to do with the bad press the president's getting, I guess.
Well, that's just the nature of the beast. There's not much you can do about that. It's just, there's a large portion of the United States that love him and put him in office, and the other half wants to throw shoes at him. You know, and that's the way it typically is. It's just that, I mean, I do admit that today the hostilities for the press towards President Trump seems to be a little bit different. But, you know, that I watched that deteriorate over the last 25 or 30 years. So that's just where we are now, you know.
When you have, let's say, for example, when you have Congresswoman Maxine Waters almost inciting people to get up in the face of Trump administration officials, et cetera. And we've seen that play out in restaurants, and it was Sarah Huckabee and so forth. Shouldn't the Secret Service be speaking to Maxine Waters or even charging her with incitement? We'll pick up on the other side, Gary. We're going to go into a break, and I'll ask you that. Gary BYRNE, former Secret Service agent, and a terrific new book, Secrets of the Secret Service, The History and Uncertain Future of the U.S. Secret Service. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show right after this.
The truth is not out there. It's right here. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Hey friends, don't know if you heard the news, but the good people at YouTube arbitrarily decided to demonetize my YouTube channel, Strange Planet. Now, they claim that we are re-uploading content that doesn't belong to us, which is entirely false. I own The Conspiracy Show. Of course, I own Conspiracy Unlimited, and I own The Rock and Roll Twilight Zone. And all of those and this radio show can be found on the YouTube channel. Now, we are reapplying for reinstatement in about 30 days. I'm not sure if we'll prevail. Something tells me we won't. It seems as if YouTube is targeting programs like mine. However, I need now your support more than ever. We've taken a big financial hit by losing the monetization on YouTube. So now I need your help more than ever. I hope you'll consider becoming an official supporter of The Conspiracy Show, the YouTube channel, and my podcast, Conspiracy Unlimited. Here's what you need to do. Go to patreon.com/Strange Planet. Patreon.com/Strange Planet. And consider donating $50 a month, $20 a month, $10 a month, or whatever you feel comfortable giving. Thank you so much. I've never needed you more.
Zoomer Magazine is all about encouraging you to be simply the best. And if you're interested in turning over a new leaf, who better to inspire than pop music's original warrior queen, Tina Turner? Also, get down with next-level research into your gut, your brain, your happiness. And for 2019, we've got 19 fresh destinations that you're going to want to know about. Zoomer Magazine's Inspired Winter Issue, on newsstands now.
The truth will set you free, but first, it will really tick you off. You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Welcome back. Gary BYRNE stays with us, former Secret Service agent and the author of A Crisis of Character, and his new one, Secrets of the Secret Service, A History and the History and Uncertain Future of the U.S. Secret Service. Before the break, I was asking you about Well, we had a call, Melanie asking about bad press and what can be done about that. But further to that, I mean, it has ramped up considerably. Other presidents have had bad press, but when you have Congress, members of the House of Representatives like Maxine Waters, really inciting, not necessarily violence, but people to get up in the face of Trump administration officials, should she have been charged with incitement? Should a Secret Service agent have spoken to her?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure under the circumstances that somebody from the Secret Service, because the U.S. Capitol, Congress actually has liaison people from the Secret Service there, and I'm sure somebody went by and talked to her chief of staff about it. Here's the problem with somebody like Maxine Waters. You know, there's always a group of people out there that are easy to incite, and it doesn't mean that they're crazy. It means that they're, you know, in some cases, in my experiences, which have been over 29 years, they're high strung, and if the right person triggers them, and they do, you know, basically my point is that kind of rhetoric from somebody like Maxine Waters is going to get somebody hurt, because if that person ends up at the White House and tries to get aggressive, they're going to get themselves arrested or worse, you know, hurt. You know, it's a lot of times it's one of the things that the Secret Service had a problem with inciting people to jump over the fence. And you know, years ago when people actually jumped the fence as a prank, and we almost killed a couple people, you know, tackling in them, stopping in them, but when you incite people to go, and if you see a cabinet member or one of the protectees and get in their face, you're closing the distance between them and their security. You're raising up the anxiety, and one mistake, and there could be a complete disaster. I've seen it happen.
Speaking of anxiety, working the rope, as they call it, that must be one of the worst assignments. Working the rope. Explain what that is.
Yeah. So let's say the president's going to come outside in public and shake hands, and so we set up a rope line. Literally, if we have to, they carry spools of rope, and they'll just stretch the rope out, get everybody behind it. We try to use like bicycle racks if we know it's going to happen early. In some cases, I've actually worked the ones that were so last minute, and we weren't really prepared, but we didn't even have rope. And agents and sometimes other government employees, we just hold hands, you know, like hands around the world, and just stand in front of the protectee and push the crowd back as far as we can. And then one or two officers or agents will go into the crowd and search people's hands, and you have them hold their hands up and look at their, you know, and try to pat them down. Yes, it is high stress, but I will tell you, if you're an adrenaline junkie like most people in the Secret Service, it's also very exciting. And once it's over and nobody's been hurt, it's been a great experience. So, but it will wind you up. I've done many of them, and some of them are kind of funny when, you know, the things that go wrong. So.
And what about when the president decides to get out of the limo and walk? Let's say during the inauguration, or after the inauguration. I mean, that's got to be stressful.
So the inauguration walk is actually not it's not as crazy as it looks to you. So what we do is we set up an area. There's the last 100 yards. It's basically from 12th Street up to the front of the White House. So the whole area is secured, but when you get to that point, the Secret Service is taking steps to make sure that every avenue of approach that you could possibly do with a rifle is thwarted. It's either being looked at. It's the counter snipers up there. They know all the buildings around the White House area. The roofs of the buildings are alarmed, and they ring right to the Secret Service. The windows are sealed up and closed, that type of thing. Everybody that gets into that area goes through a metal detector, so you know you don't have a weapon or a satchel bomb or anything like that. I mean, that's one of the things they do pretty good, and they don't skimp on anything, you know, along those lines. Like they have the manpower, they work on it months and months and months in advance. And they practice it. They actually practice it. The Secret Service practices it. Some of the groups like Counter Sniper will practice individually. PPD will practice, and then they get together a couple times, and they out at the training center, and they all do it together. And they make up scenarios. And after they've practiced all the reasonable scenarios, then they'll practice some real unreasonable scenarios. And they work it very hard.
True or false? Secret Service carry bags of the president's blood with them.
True. It's not actually the Secret Service isn't physically carrying them. The White House doctor is. Yes, they do. They have replacement blood. Yep, and platelets and plasma. Absolutely. Yep.
With them in the presidential limo?
Yeah, not normally in the limo. Usually on the plane. But there is a scenario where if they needed it, absolutely, yes.
And when the president is traveling, is the route planned out so that the president is never further than X number of miles from a medical facility?
Yeah, it is. What they do is, first off, not to mess your question up, but the most important thing is not most important, but one of the important things is that Air Force One is also a hospital. So you've got that, and then the route that he's taking, the hospitals are picked for certain specialties. If you're in New York, LA, Chicago, Philadelphia, your hospitals are experts on gunshot wounds. Most of them are because of just the crime in the city.
Right.
And let's say if a president has a special health issue, which I'm not aware of any with President Trump, and I'm not really. None of them that I have protected really had anything too serious, to be honest with you. Like nobody had a faulty heart or anything like that out of the the norm of regular people that have heart attacks. Nobody had a serious issue. So, but they do pick routes. They know where all the hospitals are. You have your hospital for shooting trauma. You have your hospital for head injuries. Sometimes it's the same hospital. And they are put on standby, and they have agents standing by at the hospital in case something goes wrong. And this is some of the lessons that they've learned from the attempted Reagan assassination.
Originally, they were going to take Reagan to the White House after he was shot. He thought he was just had a rib injury. I mean, why the decision to go right to the White House? I'm guessing that's as well equipped as many hospitals.
No, well. Yes and no. There is a doctor there, but it's pure reactional instinct. The safest place to have them is inside that fence line. You've got hundreds of uniformed division officers around them, around the complex. In the complex, you've got 50 agents. It's the safest place to be. We can lock it down very well. That was his natural instinct to get back to the White House. And then the agent's name was Jerry Parr. And President Reagan was complaining to him that he thought Jerry broke his ribs when he pushed him into the car and he hit his ribs on the transmission hump that goes through the car. And as Jerry's talking to him, and he's searching the president, and what a lot of people don't know was President Reagan was hit with a ricochet. The 22 hit the door in his car, in that car, opened backwards. They were called suicide doors, and the bullet hit the door, hit the edge of the door and flattened out. And when it hit Reagan under the arm, in his armpit, and it was flattened out, so it made like a knife wound, like a slice. And because his arm was down, he was putting a tourniquet on it. So when Parr searched him, there was no blood. And then as he's talking to the president, a little speck of blood shows up on Reagan's lip. And then Parr asks him another question, and a little more blood comes out. So he immediately tells the agent to go to GW. They spin the car around, and he saved his life. I mean, now when I met Jerry Parr in 1996, 7, and I shook his hand and I said, "It's so nice to meet you. You saved the president's life." And he goes, "No, I actually pushed him in front of a bullet, but I get what you're saying." And that's the way he looked at it.
Right.
Parr tells the story from his perspective. Technically, he pushed the president in front of the bullet, but that he was closer to the car. He followed the procedure. He did the right thing.
And then a nice recovery because he spotted the fact that Reagan had actually been hit in the lung, that frothy blood coming out of his mouth. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
We're coming up on another break here, but I wanted to ask you, in terms of the investigative wing of the Secret Service, I've read that they can track somebody if they write a threatening letter to the president. They can track that person based on the ink in their pen. True or false?
Yeah, true. True to a certain extent. Here's what you're kind of getting to. The Secret Service has an enormous ink library. They have an enormous library of ink, paper, writing devices, just about anything that anybody's ever used to write, transmit, even, letters that they've gotten, like sometimes you see in the mystery movies where they cut out words out of a magazine and paste it on a piece of paper.
Right. I've got to interrupt again. We'll pick up on this on the other side, Gary. I promise. We won't forget the ink story awaits when we come back. Gary BYRNE, former Secret Service agent, right here on The Conspiracy Show.
Corporations, governments, and sometimes entire civilizations. What goes up must come down. And it lands on The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
Vision TV enters the inner worlds of 6 awesome age defiers.
As you get older, people think that they need to take it easy. Wow, that's kind of dangerous.
Instead, they are rewriting the rules, blazing a trail into youthful subcultures, skateboarding, hip-hop, body art.
Tattoos have changed my identity.
At the tender age of 86 and under. For them, life doesn't stop at any age. Radical Age, Part 1. Catch it tonight at 9 on Vision TV. Last summer's blockbuster gets a sequel.
For breakfast radio, it's Return of the Hill Street Challenge.
Dawn of James, son of Sam.
Yeah, let's just go with Return of the Hill Street Challenge.
We're going alcohol-free with Hill Street beverages.
Only this time, we're implementing the buddy system.
So our friends, and in my case family, mine too, can also enjoy lower-calorie adult beverages with 0% of the alcohol and 100% of the taste.
Follow Breakfast Radio's alcohol-free journey throughout January and join the Hill Street Challenge at hillstreetchallenge.com.
Henley's back, and he's got company.
In an emergency, radio can warn us.
Predicting over 35 centimeters of snow coming.
Radio can direct us to safety and give us hope.
Evacuees can find shelter, food, and help at the community center.
And radio can reconnect us.
Help is waiting for you 1 hour west of the city.
Radio is our greatest, most resilient form of communication. Remember to keep your radio on and nearby in any emergency.
A message from Zoomer Radio. Because you're here for us, we'll be there for you.
Rogers is asking business owners the question, is your internet business grade?
I can get business grade internet?
It's possible.
So my business can get LTE backup for a constant internet connection, tech support anytime I need it, and network level security?
Completely possible.
That's the peace of mind I've been looking for.
Get our new Rogers Business Internet Pro with complete business grade features for $99.99 a month on a 2-year term. Call 1-866-ROGERS6 or visit rogers.com/internet-for-biz.
You can make more.
You want the truth? You can handle the truth. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. To get the truth, call Richard now at 416-360-0740 or toll free at 1-866-740-4740.
Welcome back. Gary BYRNE stays with us, a former U.S. Secret Service agent, and his new book, Secrets of the Secret Service, The History and Uncertain Future of the U.S. Secret Service. Before the break, we were talking about how the Secret Service have a way of tracking people, and it's in your desk drawer. It's a pen. The ink in your pen can be used to track the location of someone who is, let's say, writing threatening letters and so forth. So before the interruption, you were discussing that point, Gary.
Yeah, they have basically a library of paper, inks, even writing devices, as I mentioned earlier, of inks that come from chemicals, inks that are made from berries, inks that are made from even blood. They have a history or a library of all this stuff, different examples of it, and they can, if it's a repeat letter, if somebody writes a letter and it's a repeat letter, and they have an example of it, then they know where the ink came from, possibly what type of writing implement it is, and then they pass this information on to the agents, and as the investigation is going on, if they come across it, they can match ink, in the writing device, and even in some cases where if someone wrote a letter on a pad, and they know what kind of paper they're looking for, if they can find that pad, for instance, in somebody's office that has the trace marks from when the illness name, like when you put a piece of paper on,
right,
and you write, you leave the marks. They've even made cases like that. So, they have a fascinating history of tracking paper and ink and different writing devices and envelopes and the materials that the paper is made out of.
Fascinating. Let's say hi to Mike from Mississauga. Welcome, Mike. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, guys. Enjoy your show, Richard. I have two questions for your guest. The first question is, there was a movie quite a few years ago called Dave, where the president had a stroke, and they found this guy that looked exactly like the president. Does the Secret Service, or do you actually seek out and try to find people that actually look like the president? Is there a double?
Great question.
No. Yeah. So great question. No, they don't do that. It was kind of against the law, and what I mean by that is to use somebody that looks like a president and then put him in danger, whether he's in the Secret Service or not, that would be kind of hard to do. But I will tell you that once in a while, there's a Secret Service agent that does look like a president. When Bill Clinton was president, there was this agent, his name was Dave Carpenter, and he looked a lot like Bill Clinton from, 100 yards. But he was never used to impersonate him. That's just kind of Hollywood. But I will tell you, I do remember the movie, and I thought it was a pretty good movie. But again, the law kind of prohibits you from doing that in this country.
Yeah, my second question is, what was the worst threat that you guys found to be actually true, where you actually, thwarted something that was, that could have led to, some major damage?
Earlier, during President Clinton's time, when he was in Manila, they found a bomb on one of the underneath a bridge on a roadway that he was supposed to take, and it was about 25 pounds of explosives. That was pretty serious. And there were some other ones. Anytime there was a fence jumper at the White House, whether it was an actual threat or just somebody goofing around, that's always a very intense time. But I think the worst threat that I saw as far as danger to the protectee was probably in Manila with President Clinton when they found that explosive.
Mike, great questions. Thank you for that. How about does the president have an official food tester?
Not in the way you would think. Like, nobody tests the food, but they purchase the food in certain ways, and the food is controlled, by the White House cooks and by the military. Over in the West Wing, there's a Navy restaurant. They call it, in the military, it's called the mess, and the Navy mess cooks for the president over in the West Wing during the day. The food that they purchase is purchased by the Secret Service and by the purchaser at the White House. And they buy the food. They go in plain clothes. It's usually a uniformed division officer, and they go all over the Washington, D.C. area. In the District of Columbia, in Maryland and Virginia, they buy meat from one grocery store. They go to another grocery store and buy chicken. They buy the rice from somewhere else, and that's how they control the food safety. Are there times when they go to certain countries and they're concerned about where the food comes from? That's when the military guys, get involved, and they make sure that anything the president has been eating, that they made it, that they brought the materials to make it, and they know where it came from.
All right, Gary, we're going to take a timeout, one final timeout. We'll come back, and we'll focus in this next segment on what's going wrong with the Secret Service. Gary BYRNE, my guest, the author of Secrets of the Secret Service, The History and Uncertain Future of the U.S. Secret Service. Stay with us.
Don't be afraid of the dark. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio. To talk to Richard, call 416-360-0740 or toll free 1-866-740-4740.
You can live mortgage-free for 3 years at Banting Square in Alliston. That's no principal or interest payments for 3 years. Visit the Banting Square sales office at 161 Wellington Street, Saturday, February 9th. Tour the decorated model suites, then ask how you can live mortgage-free for 3 years. Or if you're content to rent, inquire about rental opportunities at Banting Square on Saturday, February 9th. Visit bantingsquare.ca or call 705-733-0300 to learn more about mortgage-free for 3.
More than 80% of drivers never drink and drive. What about the other 20%? Is it once in a while? Once a week? Once a day? If you're out with friends, don't let them drink and drive. Start the conversation. Spread the word that drinking and driving is socially unacceptable. And never get in a car with a driver who has been drinking.
Take a cab or transit instead. It's just common sense. A reminder from Zoomer Radio.
Hi, Greg. Welcome to Desjardins Insurance.
Hi, Karen. So you're no longer State Farm Canada?
That's right. State Farm Canada is now Desjardins Insurance, but we're still the same great team, and I'm still your same great agent.
Yeah, but how do I know you're still the same Karen?
You live on 28 Westwood, drive a hybrid, wife is Sarah, twin girls Rose and Emma, and you wouldn't trade your comic book collection for anything in the world, including the patio edition you and your wife have been discussing for months.
Karen.
State Farm Canada is now Desjardins Insurance. Learn more at desjardinsagents.com.
Love shopping online at well.ca? Well, now that same easy-to-use online source for trusted health and lifestyle products is saving CARP members 10% off a range of CARP-approved items, such as eye care, sleep and memory aids, and pain and weight management. Join CARP today at carp.ca/well. Then order online and get wellness delivered.
Where there's smoke, there's The Conspiracy Show with Richard Syrett from Zoomer Radio.
One final segment remaining with Gary BYRNE. And he has joined us for the entire 2 hours, and we are very grateful for that. That's a long haul to talk on the radio. Gary, how are you holding up?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you so much.
The Secrets of the Secret Service. How do people get a copy of this book?
It's still in bookstores, Barnes & Noble, or wherever you buy books, and it's also on Amazon, Amazon.com. You can also get it there. It's in hardcover, softcover. It's also in digital and audio.
Now, my very basic understanding is when organizations begin to fray at the edges and buckle under pressure, often it has to do with mission creep. So is that the case with the Secret Service, that it's the growing demands on the agency? Is it something more to do with bureaucratic battles, tight budgeting? What's going on?
It's kind of all the above. Mission creep is actually a good place to start. You know, the Secret Service's original mission was fighting counterfeit, and then then protection, and now they also do credit card and cellular phone fraud, and they also, of course, everybody's involved in anti-terrorism a little bit, and then there's also they do investigation into human trafficking, and not that these things aren't important, but they're putting so much demand on the Secret Service, and the Secret Service is guilty of a couple things that all government agencies, especially law enforcement, are. They never say no. They don't ever want to tell a president or a cabinet member or a congressperson no, because they want their budgets to expand. Every government director of an agency wants more money, a bigger budget, more employees. It's almost like they're trying to make themselves a little emperor. And I talk about many cases in Secrets of the Secret Service. I talk about one where a former director in 2014 had to admit publicly that with a $2 billion budget, that's B as in billion, he could not explain to Congress where the money came from, how he spent it. They didn't have an accountant or an accounting system, and he couldn't verify that he even spent all the money. And so it's just one of those things where if you're looking for a sign that a government agency's gotten so big that it can't get out of its own way, the modern day Secret Service is a good example, and it's one of the agencies we should try to fix first, because they have one of the most important jobs. You know, protecting the president is protecting the continuity of our government, and protecting our counterfeit is a big deal too. Protecting against counterfeit.
So it seems like one of the biggest obstacles to the agency protecting the president is the president.
Sometimes, I mean, you can make that argument, absolutely, but that's what the job is. And my take on it is, and I saw this with the people I protected. Yes, they do have some very aggressive lifestyles. You know, George Herbert Walker Bush loved to get in his speedboat and go 70 miles an hour. And the Secret Service had such a hard time keeping up with him. They actually went to the boat builder and asked him to slow his boat down, and they said no. And then they went to him and said, okay, then build us 2 boats that are a little bit faster. You know, so the protectees are the problem at the time, or sometimes, but you have to adapt to their lifestyle. And I mean, there's limits to it. There are points where Secret Service directors go to the presidents and say, look, this is just too risky, and we just cannot, protect you under these circumstances. And they usually, capitulate. But the problem is the service is so expanded, and they're doing so many things, and they have so many problems with retention. Years ago, agents never left a job, but they're leaving in droves now. I interviewed at least 100 agents that were leaving, and uniform division officers. In the next, there's 1,300 uniform division officers in the Washington D.C. area. In the next 3 to 5 years, 75% of them can retire, and they're basically about to collapse. They've got a lot of issues they have to address.
Well, when I mentioned, the president being the obstacle, I wasn't referring necessarily to the president deciding I want to get out of the limo and I want to kiss babies. Right. More to do with the president and his administration expanding the agency's mission, particularly, let's say, in the wake of 9/11 and the George W. Bush administration.
You're exactly right. One of the biggest mistakes they ever made with the Secret Service was taking it out of the Treasury and putting it in Homeland Security. And don't get me wrong, I worked for Homeland Security, and there's a lot of important jobs in there. But to put all those agencies under one umbrella, especially the Secret Service, in my view, in hindsight, was a big mistake.
And well, give me an example of things that the Secret Service is doing now that they weren't doing pre-9/11.
Well, one of them is the human trafficking, which again, very important job. But the Secret Service doesn't really have. I mean, you're just adding more work for them, and not that it shouldn't be done by somebody, but there's plenty of other government agencies out there that are doing that job. and put the burden on them. What I say in Secrets of the Secret Service is the Secret Service should throw everything over the side except for protection of the president and counterfeit. They should get rid of the other stuff, and they should realize what their limits are. And my fear is they'll never consider this until we have another disaster. And if anybody doesn't think that it can't happen, it can. I believe they're good at their job, but they're only as good as they were 15 minutes ago. Mistakes happen. I talked about the fatigue and the exhaustion of the employees. It's just these things have to be addressed. And unfortunately, we usually wait until they're a disaster before we address them.
How many people is the Secret Service directly protecting? I mean, in the White House.
I'm not really sure. Yeah, I'm not really sure. It's classified, but I will tell you, like an honest guess would be, you've got President Carter, easily 100 people.
100 people.
Yeah, I would say that's honest. I would say that's an honest ballpark.
And that's just the PPD, right?
Well, no, that's the Secret Service as a whole. The PPD just protects the sitting president, so to speak. So PPD is protecting President Trump right now, and they were like, you brought up actually a good example. 5 or 6 years ago, it was suggested that PPD expand, the Secret Service expand PPD by a minimum of 200 agents, and they tried to do it, but the agents are so burnt out that they can't replace them fast enough. They're leaving and resigning and going to other jobs, and it's hard to keep those numbers up because, again, they're caught in this cycle of they work them into the ground. They tell them what they want to hear. They get them on the job. Then they work them into the ground, and then they leave. And, back in my day, not many people left, but times have changed, and there's a lot of jobs out there, and people don't, particularly like to be treated like that anymore. So,
Gary, we're almost out of time. Let me ask you a couple of quick questions. Is alcoholism a problem within the agency?
It is a little bit. It's not so much alcoholism; it's bad management. It's okay for your employees to vent and go have a good time, but they shouldn't be doing it 8 hours before there's a function. The Secret Service's main problem is bad management and supervision. And that's when these problems with alcohol come up. That's the way I experienced it, and that's the way I see it today.
Gary, thank you so much for hanging out for 2 hours again. Secrets of the Secret Service, The History and Uncertain Future of the U.S. Secret Service, available at all good bookstores, Amazon, of course. Gary, thank you again. Great talking to you.
My pleasure. Have a great night.
You too. Gary BYRNE. All right, back next week with a brand new program. John Potash, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the documentary. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed, and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light. What I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite. I'm coming home. Good night.